story is called Pedro Pepper. Pedro Pepper sat by his little fire and shivered. He not only shivered, he also looked extremely miserable. A huge shawl was draped around his shoulders, and there was a hot cup of cocoa beside him. But he could not get warm. Pedro had only been living in the garden for 3 months. He had always wanted to visit Britain, so being the adventurous type, he had travelled from Mexico all by himself on a huge boat. When he had arrived in the garden, it was warm and sunny. Now Pedro could not understand why it had become so cold. The sky was grey, and everything looked so bleak and bare. "Where have the bees and butterflies gone?" thought Pedro. "And why don't the birds sing anymore?" A large tear ran down his face. He went over to the window. Perhaps he might see some of his friends in the garden. But, oh dear me, something very strange had happened to the glass. It had a beautiful feathery pattern all over it, and he certainly couldn't see out. He was more and more puzzled. Again Pedro shivered, and taking his big shawl and a hot water bottle, he crept up to bed. "I shall never be really warm again," he thought sadly. He was soon fast asleep, and as he slept, he dreamed of the hot Mexican sunshine and the jolly friends he had left behind. It was late when he awoke, and he could hear squeals and laughter in the garden. He hurried over to the window. Pedro rubbed the glass and was very surprised to find that the feathery pattern melted away under his hand. His fingers were wet and cold as he peered through the clear patch. What a sight met his eyes! "I must be dreaming," he thought. Falling from the sky were millions and millions of white feathers, floating gently downwards, covering the houses, the trees, and the earth. Everything everywhere was dazzling white. Suddenly a sunbeam shone through a cloud, and everything sparkled. "How beautiful!" thought Pedro. Quite suddenly, he'd forgotten the cold. All the garden gang were out there, shouting and laughing. Some were throwing the feathers around. Others were sliding or pulling each other along on strange contraptions. Many of the younger garden gang were building peculiar white men with funny hats. Alice Apple was the first to miss Pedro. As you know, she was always laughing and singing, and because Pedro was usually so cheerful and jolly, she had become one of his best friends. She looked towards his house and saw him looking through the window. She waved to him and asked him to come out. Poor Pedro! He shook his head and looked quite scared. "Please come out!" they all cried together. "We're having such great fun!" "Oh, I couldn't possibly come out there," shouted Pedro. "It's much too cold. Besides, all those feathers will only make me sneeze." How they all roared with laughter. "These aren't feathers, it's snow!" they shouted. "And the pattern on your window is called frost. The best way to stop shivering is to come out and play." So Pedro put on a warm scarf and gloves and went out to play. And do you know, for the first time that winter, he found that he was really warm.
called the Cherry Twins. Charlie and Cheryl were cheerful little cherries. Both were full of fun and chatter and were never apart. They were twins, you see. They did everything together. They even spoke at the same time. But their favourite pastime was hiding. Hiding in corners behind trees, under tables, in fact anywhere. Mr. and Mrs. Cherry loved their little twins very much, and sometimes worried a great deal when they had been searching for the mischievous pair. They would look in all the usual hiding places, but Charlie and Cheryl always seemed to find a new place to hide. Once, when Mrs. Cherry took the twins to visit Roger Radish, he made them all a pot of tea. Afterwards, Mrs. Cherry insisted on doing the washing up, and while she was busy, you can guess what happened, can't you? That's right. The twins disappeared. Roger said, "Don't worry, I'll soon find them." He searched upstairs and downstairs. They were not there. He went outside and began to search in the garden. They were not behind the compost heap. They were not under the flower pots. They were not behind the greenhouse. "They're here," he called Roger, as he spied the twins crouching behind the rockery. "Cheryl and Charlie are becoming quite a problem," said Mrs. Cherry to Mr. Cherry one evening, when the twins were tucked up safely in bed. "One of these days they will be lost forever. I do wish they wouldn't hide. Today I spent hours looking for them." Many of the neighbours suggested ideas for keeping them safe, but nothing seemed to work. Tobias Turnip thought they should be kept in a giant playpen all day, but they were much too old for that sort of thing. The twins enjoyed hiding and couldn't understand what the fuss was about. Gertrude Gooseberry arranged for the garden gang to take it in turns to watch the twins while Mrs. Cherry got on with her housework. Even that didn't work. Those naughty twins somehow managed to slip away and hide. Once it took half a day to find them. It was coming up to the twins' 4th birthday, and Mr. and Mrs. Cherry decided to give them a big surprise birthday party. They would invite all the garden gang and make a very special tea. Perhaps if they gave the twins this wonderful treat, they would stop hiding. How Mrs. Cherry managed to get the party ready, I really don't know, because most of the week was spent looking for the twins. She baked pies, sausage rolls, bread and cakes. She made jellies and ginger pop, and even made some ice cream. All this she managed to keep secret. The twins' birthday came at last, and everyone was looking forward to the party. Charlie and Cheryl were dressed in their best clothes, and the guests began to arrive. "Time for tea," called Mrs. Cherry. But where were the twins? Everyone began to search, and Mrs. Cherry began to cry. For hours they searched, and soon it began to grow dark. "Why do they hide?" wept Mrs. Cherry. Suddenly, a smiling Peter Potato appeared with the tearful twins in his arms. They had gone to hide in his shed and accidentally got locked in. Everyone had a wonderful party after that. And do you know, Charlie and Cheryl never hid again.